Welcome to the Renegade HPG podcast. My name is Travis, and my guest today is Robert Skir. Bob was a writer for BattleTech The Animated Series, which aired as a single season in 1994 and was recently remastered from homemade VHS copies and shared here on Renegade HPG's YouTube channel. BattleTech was just one in a long list of incredible writing credits for Bob, which includes Batman The Animated Series, X-Men, Gargoyles, Transformers, Beast Machines, and Prime, plus dozens more. For this podcast, though, we're going to focus on BattleTech and draw what we can from Bob's memory about the creation of that little piece of BattleTech history. Bob, thanks for coming on to chat this evening.
Travis, thank you very much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So I figured we start at the beginning and kind of see what was it that inspired you to pursue a career writing for cartoons, and how did you get your first break into the field?
Well, I got my master's degree in screenwriting from UCLA. I came out here to write screenplays. Actually, I came out here specifically to write an X-Men film. It was my big dream. And as soon as I told one of my professors, I want to write a screenplay based on the X-Men. He's like, "What are the X-Men?" Well, it's a comic book. And the light just went out in his eyes.
Oh no!
And then cut to 30 years later, and it's a $1 trillion industry at this point. But anyway, I wound up writing that screenplay, but I got my degree in screenwriting, and I was writing a lot of screenplays, which met with universal indifference. It was amazing. So I'm writing scripts and working real hard. And I met Marty Eisenberg, who was a friend of a friend, and the two of us found out that we just as we became friends, we had a lot in common. He was studying at USC, get a master's in professional writing, and we were writing screenplays together. And to pay the bills, we each got like temp jobs. So I'm working in an office, and he's working in an office, and the office he was working in was Fox Kids, and Fox Kids was just starting up. Okay. So he was there when they were putting together Project X, and Project X was Peter Pan and the Pirates, because Fox Kids was just starting up, and they were going to go head to head with Disney, and they didn't want Disney to know they were doing a Peter Pan series, because they would have rushed out their own Peter Pan series, and also would have made it very difficult for Fox. So actually, a couple of professors of mine from UCLA, Dan McLaughlin and Howard Suber, were consultants on Peter Pan, because they were there to make sure that Peter Pan, the series for Fox, didn't overlap with Disney's. So anything that you could point to that was from the original play or the original stories that wasn't part of Disney was fair game. But if you had things like the crocodile who was all happy, and it's like, okay, you can't do that. That's Disney's. And you have Peter Pan in green. So anyway, they were putting together Peter Pan and the Pirates. Marty was working for an executive named Sidney Iwanter. And Sidney was one of these really good people who really cares about the people around him. And, Sidney's there answering phones. I'm sorry, Marty is there answering phones for Sid. And Sidney's like, "Well, what do you really want to do?" And he's like, "Well, I really want to be a writer." It's like, "All right, well, you want to pitch any ideas? Pitch some ideas." So he pitched a couple of ideas for Peter Pan, and they didn't get sold, so fine. The next year they did Beetlejuice, and we pitched a couple of ideas for Beetlejuice. We came in very late in the series, and we would be considered lucky to get an episode. And we got an episode. It was fantastic. We pitched an idea. They liked it. We wrote it. We wound up writing 7 out of the 65 episodes, which in retrospect is like amazing. We were lucky to get one, and suddenly we were just, we became known as fix-it guys, because if they had an outline they were going to kill because it wasn't coming together, they'd throw it our way and say, "Hey, can you make this work?" And we would always make them work. And so everything they gave us, we got made. So basically, I was in the right place at the right time. And we did the Beetlejuice episodes. We did another show called Little Shop of Horrors. And then when Beetlejuice folded its tent, one of the story editors was going to work on a new series based on X-Men. I had just finished writing an X-Men spec script like a year before. So, not only were these characters in my DNA, but I had them so fresh in my mind. I had them so I helped them develop the series. I did the character breakdowns for it. And I was sort of like the X-Men expert. And I was there as a fanatic to make sure the X-Men were the X-Men and they weren't just a bunch of superheroes. And
well, you did good, because I grew up on that one. That was a big X-Men. Wolverine was my guy.
Wolverine's my guy. And I wanted to make sure he was Logan, who had his own moral code, who had his own way of doing things. I did not want him to be the angry guy with the claws. I didn't want Cyclops to be, the stalwart leader with the square jaw. Scott Summers is a very specific person. Yeah. So you really want to make sure he is that guy and not just, generic leader. So I come to all of this as very much a fan. I grew up on comics, grew up on science fiction. I'm here because I love this stuff. And when back then, when I was working on shows, like Marty first approached me and said, "Do you want to pitch for Beetlejuice?" And my first answer was no. I'm like, I don't want to work in animation, because in the late 80s, all of animation was junk. They had all these, the happy cows of Moon Mesa and the Care Bears and the clowns and I don't know what all. Everything was all sanitized. Everything was all, completely homogenized, and it was awful. And I'm like, I came out here to write screenplays. I take this very seriously. I don't want to write about cows on mesas. And Mighty Mouse had just come out. Ralph Bakshi had produced it, and it was amazing. And Tiny Toons was on the air, and it was amazing. And it was very clear that animation was, in fact, coming back, that people were going to start doing shows that were, like a lot more like the kind of shows that we liked. And what Marty pointed out with Beetlejuice was they want to do it wacky and irreverent, because there was an ABC version where they're in peaceful pines and everything's all silly. And here's Beetlejuice. He's a plumber now, and he's, messing up the house. And it's like, oh, Jesus, no. But what I was told was this was going to be set in the Netherworld, and it was going to be very edgy. Everything was edgy back then. But it was going to be, they wanted to be wacky like the old Warner Brothers. And that sounded good to me. And so the deal I made with Marty was, I will do this with you if we're willing to take this seriously, right at the top of our intelligence, and be willing to fight about this, because it matters. If we treat this like the writing matters, and we do things that make each other laugh, or we just write things that are interesting, then I'm aboard. But I don't want a job where I'm wasting the time of 9-year-olds 30 minutes at a time. So I wanted to write and so we wound up writing Beetlejuice. It was very irreverent. It was very fun. And then when we got to do X-Men, well, that was a really serious-minded show, That was an angsty show. It was very much about racial injustice. At the same time they were doing Batman, we got to work on Batman. Batman was as serious as a heart attack. And a very different show from X-Men, which is really wonderful when you can have superhero shows on right next to each other that are so entirely different from each other. So I was blessed. I was part of a generation that was, I think, the first generation to do these characters who grew up loving the characters. We weren't professionals coming at this like, okay, I'm going to write a Spider-Man episode. It's like, no, we're writing Spider-Man because it's a mission. So that's how I got into this business. It's the long-winded answer that you probably wanted a one-sentence dealio for, but
not at all. Long-form podcast. This is what we love to eat up. We love.
Yeah, I'm here because I love this stuff. I really do. I'm just it's. I find lots of passion projects. There are lots of things I'm very passionate about, and I take them all very, very seriously. On X-Men was a very defined universe, and I wanted to make sure the show that we did was consistent with that universe. So And this leads into BattleTech because we're going to have a conversation about BattleTech, which is a very, very defined universe that I did not know when I walked in. So so we can talk about that. But the bottom line is I'm here because I love this stuff.
Awesome. Well, I will thank you for Battleman or Battle. I'm saying BattleTech for X-Men and Batman as well. Those were both, and Gargoyles. Gargoyles, I think, was one of my favorites when I was little. I loved all those series. But
Gargoyles was fantastic. The thing with Gargoyles was, it was at that time the only Marvel comics you could find out there that was being done as Marvel comics was the Gargoyles series, because they had this strict continuity and the stories really followed each other and there was a character growth, and everything that I loved about Marvel comics was no longer really happening in Marvel comics. And they were doing the kinds of continuity and character growth that I enjoyed. So it was a blessing to get to work on that series. And I was very blessed because I got a phone call from Michael Reeves saying, "Hey, I have an episode I want you to write." And at that point, I had just finished a really hellish assignment. Like Marty and I had to write 4 episodes of a show in 3 weeks to close out a series that we did not start. So I was bleary-eyed, and I'm like, you know what? I want to get back to my stupid pirate script. So so Michael calls up and he's like, I have an episode of Gargoyles for you. And I'm like, well, I'd rather not. And he goes, well, let me tell you the idea. And he pitches me the idea. And by the time he's finished, I'm like, please let me write it.
yeah.
Please, if I don't get to write it, can I at least see it?
Yeah.
It was the episode that happens in the future when all of the gargoyles are killed.
Okay.
And it's one of my favorite things I ever wrote. I mean, it's just a really, really cool episode. It has the distinction of being in the TV museum. They actually, they picked 6 episodes. 5 of them was the pilot episode, you know, the 5-part pilot. And then they picked this episode as a freestanding episode.
Awesome.
And so I'm in a TV museum for that, and for part 2 of Days of Future Past. So it's just, again, I just love doing the stuff. And awesome. In that case, I got to work with Michael Reeves, who was also from Batman, and one of the best minds I've ever worked with. One of the best guys I've ever known. I love the guy. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, that's a good intro story, a good origin story there. So let's talk BattleTech. Let's talk BattleTech. How when did it first come to you? What part in the development process did you kind of get connected or brought into?
Well, here's what happened with that, and here's the story before the beginning. Marty and I had been hired to develop a series called Stone Protectors, and it was a toy-driven series. And the toy company had hired some producers who hired us to develop it. And what the producers said was, "Okay, well, you're dealing with us." And we're like, "Okay, well, can we talk with the toy executives?" And they're like, "No. They don't want to deal with you. They want to deal with us. We're dealing with you. So, we'll give you their notes and we'll all get along great." And Marty and I were fine with that. And what we found ultimately, the project turned out to be, rather a disaster. It was a disastrous experience. We developed the Bible and we came up with a pilot, and they produced the series. They used our Bible, but we weren't there. We left the project because we were not able to talk to the people at the toy company. We weren't able to make them happy. So whenever we would get notes from our producers, they'd be like, "Can you make this different?" Because the toy company, they'd rather it was different. And we're like, "Okay, we can make it different. Different how?" Well, in a way the toy company will like. It's like, well, can we talk to the toy company? And so it became this thing where we had to make happy people we could not communicate with. Mm-hmm. And therein lies madness. So my agent called and said, there's a series out there they're putting together called BattleTech. It's based on a property by FASA. And we're doing a series because Tyco has bought the rights to make the toys. So Tyco is spearheading an animated series.
Mhm.
And we got to talk to the producers. And so what we said from the very get-go was, okay, if we're ultimately working for that toy company, we need to be able to talk to the people at the toy company. If we don't have a direct line of communication, we're not going to be able to make them happy.
Right.
So, our deal is, if you want us on board, we need to be able to talk to the people that we are ultimately have to make happy. And so our first meetings were with the people at Tyco. When we were invited in, we had a meeting with the executive in charge of the series was Karen Lee Brown.
Yep.
I did not know her when we first signed up to do the series. Skipping ahead many chapters, the two of us are best friends now. We write together and we talk literally every day. She's my favorite person in the entire world, and it was wonderful. And back then, I did not know her. She was, I would jokingly refer to her as the toy lady. It's like, okay, we got to make the toy lady happy. So we were given an opportunity to talk with the people at Tyco. We had a meeting with them, and their office was about a 5-minute walk from my apartment. So I'm like, rock and roll.
Yeah.
Except I was in New York at the time. So I had to call in to talk to somebody that had an office literally around the corner from my house, which was an irony I absolutely loved. This is November 93. I'm in New York. It's November. We're talking on the phone, and they have sent us some material so that we see what the universe is like. And I've heard horror stories about people working for toy company shows, the G.I. Joes and things like that, where, okay, you can't talk bad about the toys, and every toy has to be represented, and you have to say every toy out loud, and it's all about the toys, blah, 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 blah. And so, I walked in with, I'm not going to say a chip on my shoulder per se, and I'm not going to say an attitude, but I came in with a point of view.
Okay.
So we're talking on the phone, and my point of view was, and I literally, this is almost verbatim. I'm like, hey, listen, I looked at the material, and I just want to say, I really don't have any interest in space tanks. Like I want to tell stories about characters. I want to know, like, who is our hero? What is he after? What's in his way? Does he get it? Doesn't he get it? Why doesn't he get it? I want to do a story about, character growth. So if this is going to be a show about toys and space tanks, I don't know if I'm the guy for it. But if you want to tell a story about characters, let's talk rock and roll. And that sounded really good to Karen. She really liked that. And all of our conversations from that point on were all about character and all about story and all about the structure of the series. And whereas, yes, there were, lots of toys we had to have in the series, it was wonderful because, well, they became characters in their own right, because they, the different battle mechs and everything were part of the personal growths of the characters, that they themselves became an extension of the characters, and they became really important. So we didn't have to shoehorn this shit in. It was all very much organic into the creative of it all. So the more that we were dealing with our characters, the more that the battle mechs were very much at the center of what the stories were doing. So it became a drama because it was about the characters, it was about the conflicts between them, and it became the project that I really, really wanted to work on. They wanted to make the same show I wanted to make, and that's important too. When you're working with people, you want to make sure that you all want to be doing the same show. If everyone is pulling in a different direction, it's a disaster. And I've had that happen on dream projects, actually. But in this case, Karen wanted to do the show. I wanted to do, Marty wanted to do, Kurt wanted to do. We were all very much pulling in the same direction. And the notes that I got from Karen were about character and story. And, if she caught us cutting corners, it's like, oh, they won't notice if this doesn't make sense. It's like, no, they notice when things don't make sense. We weren't getting away with anything. Her story sense is really, really good. And yeah, we got to do a series that I'm super proud of. We were talking with her about the show. We read several of the novels. I read Lost Destiny and Heir to the Dragon, and probably a couple of others to get a feel for what the universe is like. And Marty and I came up with a basic story, and we were also given we were given a lot of story ideas by Sam Lewis. And I don't remember exactly what we were handed and exactly what we came up with, because it was a long time ago. I might have some of the written development somewhere, but I think we were handed the strikers.
Okay.
And as a thing, it's like, well, here's your hero. He comes from this planet, and he and the strikers don't affect the war in any meaningful way, which was really wonderful, because you realize, okay, well, if what they're doing isn't important to the grand scheme, we don't have to pay that much attention to grand scheme issues.
Right.
They don't have what he's fighting for. Doesn't need to be important for the overall world. It needs to be important to him. So if his whole goal is to go back to his planet and free him, to free his brother and his people, then that becomes a really worthwhile drama, and one that we can focus on the character and not focus on giant big picture issues. We get the broad stroke that there's a giant war going on out there. We get a feeling of what's all happening, but we're focusing on this one band of people who are on a specific mission. And so we worked together to create a character arc, and also like a series arc. We were going to do 13 episodes. It was the first season of what we were hoping was going to be several seasons. But I looked at this series. One of my favorite things about X-Men was that they did, in fact, do a show with a series arc, with a seasonal arc, with continuity to it, where the stories built on each other. We did that much more thoroughly on BattleTech, because what we did was I saw it as a novel for television in 13 chapters. So whereas each chapter would stand on its own, they were all part of one narrative. And throughout the narrative, each of the characters would grow and change. The relationships would grow and change. And it was a singular story. So that's how we approached it. So when we met with Karin face to face, finally, we were going to meet in January. We were going to have a big meeting. It was going to be a lunch meeting, which is always awesome because you get food out of it. But the day we were going to meet, they had this giant earthquake. So that didn't happen. So we didn't get together until a few weeks later. It was actually, thinking back to it, it was the day of Jack Kirby's funeral. So, I show up at this meeting and I'm like wearing a suit and tie like a fucking idiot. I left the tie in the car, probably the jacket too, but I'm overdressed. Okay. Yeah. I'm jeans and a t-shirt guy, but we sat down in an office, Karin and Sam Lewis, Marty and we talked about the episodes we had come up with. We came up with 13 premises. The first 4 or 5 were pretty fleshed out. And then as the series moves along, the stories become more broad strokey, because we're going to figure shit out on the road as things develop, as things become more clear. So it's only natural that but we knew what the end point was going to be for the series. And that was really important. So we pitched the various stories, and Karin would look at it and say, okay, that's good. I like that. And I like that. There was one episode idea, I think for episode 7, I wanted to do a story about a T-Tauri star, which is, there's a phase of a star's life where it expels all these gases. So basically where you hear about the solar wind, imagine a star that surrounds itself with a solar hurricane. So the not the drop ship, the what are the
Jump ship.
The jump ships. The jump ship goes into this area around this star, and they have to figure out how do we get out of here before we get blown to pieces. And it was, the story that I came up with, and Karin looks at it and goes, I don't get this one. And I go, okay, and I cross it out and go, fuck it, we'll come up with something else. And that was our relationship. It's like, you like it, great. You don't like it, we'll do something better. One of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted to have a problematic ending. I didn't want things to end really cleanly where, it's all balloons and party favors and,
right.
Ewoks having a picnic. I wanted to have an ending that was kind of, if not downbeat, then certainly, bittersweet. And so what I was thinking was, okay, well, what if at the end he wins the planet and the clans are like, okay, you've won, your planet is yours, and they leave. And as soon as they leave, they carpet bomb the entire planet. Mm-hmm. and Karin allowed that was not going to happen. She was not on board with that. And so Sam Lewis came up with the idea, well, what if the bargain is for the planet, but he doesn't mention the people and they take the people? And I'm like, I can work with that. So, but that carpet bombing thing, we wound up being in episode 4,
right. Yep.
Yeah. So
yeah, Romulus, I think it was. Yeah, and
yes, Romulus.
You mentioned reading the books. Do you said Lost Destiny, Heir of the Dragon. Do you remember other books? Were there books? Were there source books as well? Just because
I want to circle back to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
When I was reading the books, mm-hmm. what I noticed and I absolutely loved was that when we're with the people in the inner sphere, we're totally on their side, right? Mm-hmm. They're our guys, and we're like, and then when you cut to the clans, you're on their side because what they're fighting for absolutely makes sense. And we like them as much as we like the other people. So wherever we are, we're on the side of the people that we're with. And I really loved that kind of, I'm not going to say a gray area, but the idea that, it isn't just good versus evil. It's different points of view butting heads. Yeah. And I thought, hey, what if we did a series where, instead of having bad guys, it'll be a shades of gray kind of deal where we like both sides. And so, and Karin allowed that. Now we want to have very clear good and evil. Mm-hmm. We want to make sure that the bad guys are the bad guys and the good guys are the good guys. And I think that for the age group we were going for, that is exactly the right decision. Mm-hmm. We made a decision very early on that served us very well and bit us in the ass. What I like the idea of writing up to my audience. I like to think that audiences are very intelligent. Mm-hmm. And I like to write over their head and have them come up to it. Yep. So, when we're writing X-Men or Batman, we're not writing down to children. We're writing, first of all, we're writing stories for ourselves. When I write, I'm writing for me.
Yeah. So
we wrote BattleTech with an idea toward, okay, we're gonna make this, we're going to write for high school and college students because, we're going to make this really smart. The kids will they'll see the action and they'll follow the stories and they'll like it too. But, they're watching a mature story that treats them intelligently. Well, as a consequence, we were the #1 series among 15 to 18-year-olds. Which was not our target audience. Tycho's target audience was 2 to 11 people buying toys.
Yeah.
And so the fact that we reached the audience I wanted to reach was wonderful. Way to go, Bob. But ultimately, it's because the ratings were not wonderful for what Tycho needed it to be, they figured, okay, their money was better spent on advertising than in doing a second season. So we didn't get to do our second season, but we got to tell the story we wanted to tell. So win some, lose some.
Not to throw Karen's side under the bus, but the toy company definitely was below quality compared to the writing of the series. So, it has to be kind of both sides, on that. If there's
I'm
better
sorry,
toy,
what do you think? You mean the toys themselves, or are you talking
yeah,
about what?
the toy, the quality of the toys, I think, in terms of what was available out there, in the mid '90s, that they were subpar. Um, but if so it's got to be both. It's that kind of balancing act between the toys and the kids wanting to buy them and having the story to back them up.
Well,
But
I like the toys. They
yeah,
they sent us samples. I liked them all. I displayed them for years.
yeah,
Um, and I think that Karen was a wonderful producer in the series, and she allowed us to do a series that many people wouldn't have allowed us to do. So,
I
to
would
say
say,
I'm grateful to her is a supreme understatement. Because like a lot of people, there was an episode that the executives wanted to kill. It was very late in the season, and she could easily have said, "My bosses want this gone, so start over." And she didn't do that. What she said was, "No, we signed off on this story. We're going to do this story. We'll change it in a way that will make you happy with it. But I'm not going to throw it out the window because we agreed to do it, and it isn't fair to make them just start over on something that they worked very hard on." And I'm like, I love this woman. I love this woman. She
yeah.
did something that no other executive would do, because it would have been just as easy for her to say, "You know what, my bosses don't like it. Sorry." But she stood up for us, and that
Well,
was wonderful.
yeah. It sounds like we're here talking because of kind of what she brought to the project and that emphasis on story. Because I'm not doing a podcast on Care Bears, and I watched a lot of Care Bears when I was a tiny kid. So it's there's something to be said for that quality and longevity. So it's appreciated on that end. Um, did you ever get a chance to work together with the writers of the novels, the people who had been producing, like a Stackpole or Bob Charette or Bob Thurston, who were writing on the novel side or on the source book side, to kind of align a little bit better? Or were you just kind of reading and kind of trying to infer as much as you can and build on that?
B. We were
B.
reading a lot, we were inferring a lot, and we had Sam Lewis, and Sam
Yeah.
Lewis was our guy.
Yeah.
I was a huge fan of Michael Stackpole's. Reading the novels that he wrote, I loved him. I
Yeah.
absolutely loved him. And so it's inspiring to work on something where when you're reading about this world, you become very invested, and I became very invested very quickly.
Yeah.
There were a couple of things that we lifted from the novel that I'm really happy with.
I'll tell you.
Um, yeah, in I think it was Heir to the Dragon, there was this character, Franklin Tanaka. There was an infant. There was a little baby named Franklin who got spirited away
Yeah.
because he was this bastard son of blah blah blah. And it was like the emperor's illegitimate grandson.
Yeah.
And I turned to Sam and I'm like, "Sam, what happens with this character?" He goes, "Oh, we never did anything with him." I'm like, "Until now." And so I'm like, "Okay, well, let's bring this character in. He's got a mysterious past, always a plus. He's adversarial to our heroes." And I immediately saw Franklin as being a co-hero with Adam. I saw him as being our Wolverine.
Yeah.
He's somebody that we couldn't trust, but ultimately could trust. He's somebody who, whenever he did something, even if it was good, he did it in a devious way. And he's somebody that we didn't know very much about, and we were learning about little by little. And the more that we learned that sort of either contradicted itself, or like these new folds that we saw, it's like, well, we didn't see this about the character, we didn't know that. It's like, the more that we knew that we didn't know, the more that we knew that there was more to know. So I really wanted that character to pop, and I love the way that he did in the series.
Well, Franklin's my
last
favorite
name
character.
Sakamoto, by the way,
I like that.
comes from Ryuichi Sakamoto, who is a composer, a Japanese composer, and he got the Academy Award for The Last Emperor, with David Byrne. The three people worked on the score for that, and they got an Oscar. So so I loved Sakamoto's work, and so I used that last name. A lot of the names in the series were things that I sort of like picked from different areas, and didn't want to call attention to themselves. I hate when people name characters after their friends, because it always sticks out like a sore thumb. But if you can find the name and a way to put it in there that's not obtrusive, it's always really worth it. The other thing that we got from the books was Zero. I don't remember exactly. Well, he was somebody's roommate in one of the books. He appears in like a couple of paragraphs. I don't think he's a major character. I think he was just kind of there. Yeah. And I'm like, you know what? That's an interesting character. Let's bring him on board. So we brought him on board, and the idea with that character was, I forget. Yes, in one of the books, there was somebody who becomes a bondsman and who joins the clans. Mm-hmm. And he is there to mitigate things. He's there to make sure, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to help you take over these planets in the least destructive way, because, I'm on board with you guys now, but I don't want to see my people getting hurt. Yeah. And I didn't want to just redo that story, because I feel like that had been told, even though it hadn't been told for our audience. It would be brand new for them. But it felt even cooler to have one of our characters join the bad guys and become more like them than they were. So all the stuff about honor, all the stuff about Kerensky, all the stuff about the traditions, Zero isn't just brought on board. It's already inside him to admire that stuff. And so by the end of the series, he is even more dedicated to that purpose than Malthus is. So he becomes, we get to see him become radicalized, which, he got to have an incredible character arc. And at the end, we don't redeem him. He stays with the bad guys. He's on board with them now. We had a great character arc for Franklin, because we got to know who he was, and we got to give him a really epic story. So those are the things that came from the books most directly.
Well, Franklin's my favorite character, and episode 11 is my favorite episode. I really enjoyed it. And like you said, his actions, I feel like, there's the most continuity from episode to episode in terms of consistency in how he does things, how he approaches it. So I enjoyed him. And Kristen was another favorite character of mine, though she kind of gets a little erratic at the end, bouncing from one side to another. But at least there's, like you said, there's Zero there to oddly be the clan conscious at the end, right? Yeah.
She's so consistent. Mm-hmm. She gets captured and she says, okay, well, I am now going to help you. And, because they don't understand her, it makes her insane. And she has to escape and join her people again, because being around these people is only going to make her crazy. It's completely consistent with the character. Ironically, episode 11 was the one that the executives wanted to kill.
Yeah, I had a feeling when you were saying it.
Yeah, they did not like that one. They felt it centered so heavily on Franklin that it took so much focus away from Adam that it almost made it seem like, okay, well, we're making him the hero now. And I'm like, and of course, thinking, they caught me. They caught me. I mean, I really, and so it's like, no, Adam is our hero. We need to focus on Adam. So instead of killing the episode, what happened with Karen was, it's like, okay, we will shift the focus so that we never lose focus on Adam. Mm-hmm. And so we won't feel that we're leaving him behind and that we're only highlighting Franklin. So by having more scenes with Adam and by leaving a few of the scenes in, with Franklin, more in the shadows, it appeased the gods at Tycho. And so we were able to do that story. If we hadn't been able to do that story, I would have been crushed, because we spent a lot of the season really building up to it. There are lots of little seeds in there where we're hearing about, people's relationships inside the Draconis Combine. And, we really needed that story to play out. If it didn't, it just would have been terrible. So
Right.
so I loved Franklin. Just loved him.
Did you follow where he went in the BattleTech universe after the cartoon? Where he is in the lore?
No, did they follow up with him? Did they continue with him?
Yeah, there's a little history. And so just kind of pulling up the wiki, make sure I get it right. But I think later he reconnected with Theodore, who finally recognized him as his son and then made him officer of the Otomo, who is like kind of the royal guard for the Kurita family. And then later, a couple generations down, I think his granddaughter Yori eventually became coordinator because there was some kind of purge of the Kurita family. So all of the rightful heirs were killed, and she was kind of the last remaining blood relative. And so, I think that I don't know what year that was, probably in the 3100s, but yeah. So
So
eventually,
was
Franklin's line came to take the throne. Eventually, anyway.
so did Franklin account for his time with strikers in the
Yeah.
books?
So this is cool, and it was funny as my last two podcasts were with Sam Lewis, and he was talking about the cartoon series and how he would have made it totally canon and kind of ran with it. But what ended up happening was that they made the cartoon canon in the series, but it's canon as Lyran propaganda. So the core elements of the series are all real events, but kind of the details and the characterizations were all kind of exaggerated for the Lyran propaganda machine, which I love. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And so everything in the cartoon is canon, but it is a Lyran cartoon. All the characters are the same. In the real world, they had the real Malthus challenge the Lyran, I don't know, the Steiner House or the Lyran Federated Commonwealth to a trial of grievance over his portrayal in the cartoon, and eventually he was declared in contempt by the judge for yelling that he dared to refuse his betrayal or something along those lines. But yeah, they had a lot of fun with the cartoon. But yeah, all the characters are in there. They're still part of the BattleTech history.
Is that in a novel?
That is in source books. Gosh, I don't know where there's a first Somerset Strikers source book for the game,
Yes.
which fleshes out some of the details there. But the Franklin's history and Yori's history is outlined, I think, in 2 novels, and then the rest is kind of spread out in various source books and rules supplements. But it's
I would
there.
love to have read that in a novel. I would love to have read all this in like a Stackpole novel. That would have been that would have been
Stackpole's still writing, but yeah, he's out there. I've had a couple chats with Mike on the podcast, so
he's written some Star Wars books, hasn't he?
Oh yeah,
I need to get those.
I Jedi, and he wrote the X-Wing novel series, which is they're trying to make into a movie now. I'm not sure where they are on that, but I think Patty Jenkins was kind of earmarked to direct that, who did Wonder Woman. But yeah, so yeah, he's Star Wars. Mike hit it big with Star Wars, and he still writes BattleTech. So I think there's 1 or 2 novels or short stories a year that he's been producing. But he writes kind of the tentpole books for the series and always have, like, the major events. And I think Blaine Pardoe, who I don't know if was writing regularly when you were doing the series, but Blaine and Mike are kind of the most prolific writers right now for BattleTech. But yeah,
I loved the books when I was reading them.
Yeah. Mike's books were my favorite as a kid. Now Charette's books kind of take the #1 spot for me. Now that I'm a little older, I can appreciate his themes a little bit more.
I had wanted to, because we weren't brought back for a second season, I wanted to write a novel based on where I thought the story would go afterwards.
Yeah.
Because you have Adam at the end, who I wanted to give him a trajectory that was like Malthus's. Because Malthus, he goes Captain Ahab, right?
Yeah.
With the strikers, he's basically like, like they're all like, you have a mission, and he's like, I'm going after my own mission, and he becomes Captain Ahab. And so what I wanted to do was in the next story, Malthus is sort of on the run from Adam, because Adam has become Captain Ahab, and the rest of his crew have to like rein him in. and he's just like, he's just so focused. And I wish I could have done that. I wish we could have continued the series, just because when you look at Kylie's blouse, there's less of it in every episode. I'm not going to see how many episodes. If you look at episode 12, right? It's just like there's nothing there. And I'm like, episode 18, I'm there for 18.
Too funny. Too funny. Yeah, Kurt was telling a story about on X-Men where they had to redo some Lady Deathstrike episodes because they had shown a little too much of Lady Deathstrike.
Yeah, there were some scenes where they animated Rogue just a little too thoroughly.
Oh boy.
It's like, hey, they don't have to move too, it's
yeah. Hey, sugar takes a whole new meaning there.
What's also very funny is in BattleTech, there are all these scenes, everybody has a ripped shoulder. And there are all these scenes where everybody in the scene has the same ripped shoulder.
Yeah.
And it makes
people have commented like, oh wow, he finally changed his uniform. It's been 3 months. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it would have been really cool if there was no rip, then there was a rip, then there was like it was sewn shut. I wish we could have done that kind of stuff. Yeah. Which speaks, by the way, to one of the conversations that we had early on. When you're working on shows on the level of X-Men and BattleTech, you look at those shows, you look at like X-Men's a high profile. It's like, well, yeah, but no. The people who made these shows were working on shoestring budgets with shoestring animation studios. And they'd farm out to a lot of different studios. And things wouldn't come back in the order you sent them out, which isn't really a problem unless your show is built on a continuity, in which case it becomes a problem. And so when we were first doing X-Men, the whole conversation was, what are we going to do when the episode's coming out of order? And my point of view was, I grew up reading Marvel comics, and Marvel comics have a big continuity. DC, not so much. So if you pick up an issue of Batman, it's like, okay, well, it exists in its own little, bubble because every episode was a standalone. But with the Marvel books, they all had a very big continuity to them. And if I read an issue of Fantastic Four, and then I read an issue of Fantastic Four that was like 5 episodes before that, I had no trouble saying, okay, well, that episode happened first, this happens here, I had no trouble piecing it out. And my philosophy on audiences is they're not stupid. They're not stupid. Anybody who is smart enough to want to watch our shows has to be smart. Yeah. So if you have an episode of X-Men that starts out with Wolverine, and he's really, really, he's severely injured. And he's recovering from an injury from fighting Magneto. Mm-hmm. And we didn't see that fight. And then a week later, we have him fighting Magneto and getting seriously hurt. I think our audience will figure out, oh, okay, well, this episode happens before this one. Yeah. They figure it out. And then after the first season is finished, if they air out of order, every time after that, they will air in order. There will be no problem there. Right. So with BattleTech, it was the same way. It's like, okay, well, some of the episodes will come in a little out of order. That's going to be problematic given our, how we have arranged this thing as a novel. But you know what? Our audience they'll come along with us. They'll be fine. And after the first time, they'll see it in order and it'll play that much better. But, we had, previously on, which kind of helped people, piece together stuff. So even if they didn't see the episode, if we got enough clips from the episode in that we could put together something that would let people know what was going on, they wouldn't be so lost. So they could watch episode 4 without seeing episode 3, despite the fact it was a 2-parter, and not be completely, terribly, horribly. So, we wanted continuity. They let us have continuity, even though they knew the episodes weren't going to air they weren't going to air in order the first time that they aired. Right. And that was another choice that we made to make the series more mature, that they let us do. So it's yet another instance of the artistic freedom that they gave us and the support that they gave us and the latitude that they gave us. They put a lot of trust in us, and they liked the passion that we brought to it. One of the reasons that Karin said that she hired Marty and I was that we were up for it, and there was another writer who was up for it, and the other guy had a lot of credits. He was he's extremely experienced, but he seemed like it was, to him it was like, oh yeah, I've done this kind of show before, and we'll do this and we'll do that, and it just seemed like he was just ready to go in there and do shit by rote. And Marty and I wanted to roll up our sleeves and really tell stories, and I think Karin got that we were going to take this super seriously, and that we're gonna, we weren't going to take the series for granted, and we weren't just going to do it by rote. That we really wanted to look at this universe and do it justice. And circling back to what I said about X-Men, I needed the X-Men series to be right. I needed it to conform to what the comics were, so that they wouldn't be different things; they'd be the same thing. Yeah. And toward that end, they got a lot of things about Rogue wrong the first season. And so the second season, I did an episode called The Rogue's Tale. And by the time that episode was finished, that character was exactly the same character in the comics as she was in the animated series. Because it was important to me that this universe be respected that way. And so when we did BattleTech, we wanted to make sure that we had the same fidelity to this universe that was vast, had a lot of books, had a lot of followers, had a lot of games, a lot of source books, and we couldn't read all of it. There was no way for us to assimilate everything. We assimilated what we could, but what we tried to do was make a series that was consistent with the universe, and our hope was that Sam was able to guide us to make sure that the series fit in and wouldn't be seen by the fans of BattleTech and Mechwarrior as this aberration where these cartoon guys came in and did a cartoon, and well, this isn't what we like, but it's just like it's this weird thing based on it. I mean, we wanted to make things for the fans with the understanding that it wasn't necessarily going to fit in really snugly because there's so much of it, and because they have certain expectations too. I think people in the books, when you had these various officers, they would have hundreds of mechs behind them as part of their battalions, and and we could have like one or two. Right. Our budgets did not allow us to have an endless supply of soldiers and mechs, and some of the fans, when we were first on, were complaining that there were no casualties, nobody dies, and it's like, well, in kids television, we can't kill people off, so we did as close as we could, and but people were like, how come nobody dies? And it's like, well, because it's an animated series. But we had a note early on they gave some of our early scripts to a company that does broadcast standards and practices to give us BS&P kinds of notes. And one of the notes they gave us was, when the soldiers go into battle, make it very clear that none of them will be injured or killed. And, we were not beholden to these notes. We were just giving them so that we could see what, but my response to that was, I can't think of a more irresponsible message to give children, that war is bloodless and carries no ramifications. And I've never read a more immoral note in my life.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some elementals that bite it, in the series. There's no way of getting out, ejecting from that. But one of my funny, I don't know if this is intentional, in the series as goes, but I don't think there's an episode where Val does not fall down in his mech, which always gives me a tickle every time. It's like, oh, someone shot Val, he fell on his back again. But I'm curious, and which leads me into my next question is, What's the kind of level of cooperation interaction between you and the animation? How much is the animation purely going around what you're writing, and how much do you have to sometimes write or change what you write for what you got back from the animators?
Well, we were definitely writing into the the limitations of the level of animation that we were getting. So, I mean, we knew who we were writing for.
Yeah.
We didn't say a lot. I mean, they sent us some storyboards and we give notes about that and stuff.
Yeah.
But we had a lot more indirect communication about the CGI, and that was always very fun. The first we saw of the CGI, they showed us some test footage, and the test footage was spectacular. And I looked at it and I'm like, this is mind-blowing. This is mind-blowing. This looks like an $80 million movie. Back then, $80 million was a lot of money. This looks like an $80 million movie. And it's not going to cut in to this bad animation that we're going to be getting. It's not going to cut in. It's not going to work. And if we're going to use this, we have to have a reason why we're seeing things in CGI. But we also need to see things in CGI that we can cut back and forth with and not feel like we've just changed channels.
So you didn't want super duper ultra enhanced imaging, just regular enhanced imaging?
Well, activate real world imaging. Okay, back to cartoon imaging.
Yeah.
So what we came up with was,
does that exist anywhere? Is that somewhere I could get my hands on and show people of that sample? Does that exist? That would be cool.
I'm sure it exists out there somewhere
in the Saban / Disney archives now.
But what they had to do was it's like, okay, we'll dumb down the animation to make it, like you bring the colors up, you bring the detail down, and so it looks much more tactical. We didn't want to just do wireframes because that would just look cheap, even though it would make sense for a tactical to be a wireframe. So they look more realistic, or they're more detailed than wireframes, but they're not, they're not going to be like photorealistic. And the photorealistic stuff, I mean, I tell you, it is mind blowing. But here's the irony: was they were really mad. They're like, hey, we can give you a Porsche, and you want a Schwinn. And it's like, well, that's kind of what we have to have. But in the beginning, we were asking for things they told us they could not do. So we had an axe man, and he swings the axe, and they go, well, we can't have him swing the axe. And I'm like, why? And the answer was, I don't remember. It was difficult or some shit. And I go, okay, so you want his battle cry to be, don't make me swing this?
Yeah.
But eventually he fucking swung it, because he had to. And one of the other things, this was amazing. We were told that the toad suits couldn't fly. We couldn't make the toad, we could not have in CGI, we could not make them fly. And my response was, why the hell not? And they're like, well, it's, I don't know, too much rendering time, or too much this, or too much that. It's too hard. I don't know. And I'm like, no, you can make them fly. Of course you can make them fly. How can you not be able to make them fly? You cut and paste them off the ground, and you don't have shadows right under them, and there they are. They're flying. Yeah. And ultimately, they flew. But the fact that they were initially saying, well, we can't make them fly, I'm like, that's fucking ridiculous. So on the one hand, they're like, why can't we make these things super sophisticated? But on the other hand, we can't make it, we can't make the move because I was very confused by that. But ultimately, what they gave us was absolutely beautiful. And we were able to come up with a good, solid reason why we were in a cartoon show and suddenly seeing CGI and cutting back and forth. I think that when we came up with enhanced imaging, we really came up with something great there. It justified something that otherwise would have taken people completely out of the show. Right. There was a show that Hanna-Barbera did at one point. I forget what it was. It was like Space Cats or something. And some of it was in cartoon animation, and some of it was like Jim Henson kind of puppets. And they cut back and forth. So it's like, okay, let's go down to the planet. And then you cut to, and it's like, well, why are we going back and forth? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
We did a show called Dog City, where we had these animated dogs, and then we had these Jim Henson dogs.
Mm-hmm.
But the Jim Henson dogs were real, they were real dogs, living their real lives. And the cartoons was the cartoon that one of our real dogs was doing. So he'd be like, I'm going to do my cartoon show. And then you cut to the cartoon. And that made sense. So, when you're going to cut back and forth between different media, you have to kind of make it okay for the audience. And once again, I think we came up with a pretty good reason. We came up with a really good device for it.
Definitely. And talk to me about kind of the tagline, information is ammunition, kind of where did that come up? Where was that inspiration from?
That line is entirely Marty's. Okay. I'm sure he came up with it. I don't remember reading it in a book or anything. It sounded the kind of thing he would come up with. Mm-hmm. And we used that line so many times in the series. And, I used to try to find ways to mock it. Okay. But he came up with this kind of theme, and he ran with it, and it's like, okay, well, that's good. I mean, it's a good motto for our hero to have, so sure. But yeah, they went kind of nuts with that, and I'm giving that right to Marty.
Excellent. Well, I enjoy the in meta universe of it. I think it's episode 4 or so where they all start mocking it. I forget the exact scene, but all of a sudden,
if he says that one more time, I'm gonna
definitely. Well, so later in the series, and kind of talking about the toy tie-in, we brought in the Bushwhacker and the Sloth and the Infiltrator. Was that kind of planned in the early stages, or was it at some point you're kind of coming along and we were like, we want to sell more toys, figure out how to get these into the show?
No, that was very much baked into the initial idea. Mm-hmm. We wanted to have it where, okay, if these guys are going to have these mechs, they're going to get blown up, and if they're going to be behind enemy lines, they're not going to be able to fix them all. I mean, they're going to, so meanwhile, they had all these different designs. And so it's like, okay, well, at a certain point, we can introduce these other ones to replace the ones that we don't have. And they became story points, and they become very fun and very useful. And we did things like, we had the Axeman fall into the hands of the bad guys, and the good guys got him again. We did the thing where we grabbed the Toad suits, and then the Toad suits led to these other new technologies. So it all worked really well within the story. So it isn't one of these things where they imposed it on us.
Yeah.
It's one of these things where it's like, okay, we don't want to introduce every single toy in the first episode. That's so cumbersome. Mm-hmm. So if you sprinkle them out and have them so you're watching the series evolve as these new different vehicles are brought in.
Yeah.
So it feels very organic to the series. It doesn't feel like it's imposed, and it doesn't feel like, it got shoehorned in because an executive called up and said, hey, we want this in there. Right. It's baked into the universe. So that worked out really nicely.
And a lot of people love the design of the Bushwhacker. I just think it's, one of kind of the mechs that just really stands out. Do you know if did that come from Sam's side in BattleTech, or did that come from Karen's side in there? And do you know what the origin of that mech design was?
I gotta be honest. I do not remember.
Negative.
I do not remember. I'm willing to bet it came from Tycho.
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet that it was, one of the toy designs where it's like, where we've come up with this. I mean, they didn't come up with the toys based in the series. We did the series knowing what the toy designs or what the various mechs were going to be.
Okay.
So we didn't say, there shall be a Bushwhacker, and then they suddenly develop Bushwhackers. I think that came in from outside. It came either from Sam or it came from Karen.
Gotcha. And I'm curious in the production process and kind of how much the writing kind of spreads out. Do you get to work at all with the voice actors? Are they kind of bouncing between you, or are they kind of doing their thing after you do your thing? How's that?
We were there for every single record.
Awesome.
We were there for every single record. They were all done here in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And Marty and I were there for all of our episodes.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really good. It was, it's important. It's important to be there for them. It's especially important. Well, when we did our first episode, the actor who played Adam Steiner, we loved him. We loved him. We heard his voice, and it's like, this is Adam Steiner. This is perfect. And he came in and he started to do his lines, and all of his lines were, we were gonna, forward march. It's, he was very much, he was playing the square-jawed hero. He gave us the hero voice, and we're like halfway through the episode, and we're like, yeah, something's not right here. Something's not right. And we just, we stopped the record, and we're like looking at each other, and we're kind of thinking. And then very, very, very smart, very shrewd, the actor came into the booth, because I think he got that we were kind of like that he may have been part of this conversation. And so he came in and he's like, okay, so what? And what we told him was, we hired you because we really like your voice. So use your voice, use the qualities of your voice that make you, like, be you. Don't puff out your chest and become heroic. Be yourself. Because he had a really wonderful voice that had strength behind it, but also vulnerability and intelligence. And he was exactly perfect. And as soon as we told him that, he went out there and we had our Adam Steiner. But at first, if when actors, when you're in front of the microphone, it's like it's a firing line, and reading stuff and talking in front of a microphone, it's not as easy as it sounds. And when you're an actor and you have to make all these creative decisions, and meanwhile you're surrounded by other actors, and you have this behind the glass, there are all these figures, the shadowy figures that are. I do not envy the voice actors. I have great admiration for all of them. But that was a case where, because we were there, we were able to fix a problem before it became a problem. If we had not been there and we got the first 4 episodes, and the actor was just so macho, and it's like, no, you have to redo everything or recast things or rethink things. Because we were there, we were able to avoid a major problem, and that was important. It's wonderful to be there because the actors are wonderful. On the shows that I've worked on, I've worked with some I've worked with amazing casts, and the people who come into the voices, they're all professionals. They're all actors who come in, they're there to do the job. It's a 4-hour session. They come in, they haven't read the scripts beforehand. They read the script when they come in. They're presented with it. They go through, oftentimes they'll do a rehearsal, read through, and then they'll do the record. Sometimes they'll just do it fresh, with the idea that, we want the fresh energy of a first read, as opposed to, well, it's faster that way and we'll get home sooner. I prefer doing the rehearsal, but on this series, the voice director did something that I've never seen done in another series. I'm sure it happens. He had a way of directing that I found problematic. We would go in and the scripts would be there. And the scripts were all of the characters' dialogue. The name of the character and the dialogue, name of the character, dialogue. All the descriptions were gone. All the locations were gone. All the context was gone. So the actors are there, and all they know is that they have these lines, and they don't know what the lines mean. They don't know what the context for the line is. And so you could have the director there saying, okay, well, this is what's happening here now, which is a great way to justify your job. But it's just bullshit on the actors. I mean, it's kind of helpful for them to know what the context of everything is. And it was very problematic that the director did it that way. And I was not a fan of that. There was one episode in particular, I think it was episode 7. It starts out with a fight between 2 people, and they're having an argument, and they're negotiating, and it's Kristen. I always get that's the Kirsten Dunst.
Sure.
Yeah, so Kristen and Malthus are having a fight. So they're having an argument. They're having a debate.
Right.
And the lines are playing through, and they're playing through. And finally, Kurt Weldon taps the director on the shoulder and says, Stu, they're fighting in 0G while they're saying this. And so they had to redo everything where, we had like exertion grunts and people, making effort noises, and they had to have them, when they say the line, they're doing something. Because it's like, they're not just talking with each other across a table, right?
Yeah.
You're flipping somebody through the air while you do it. One of the other things was, I like to write what I call sideways dialogue. I don't write things straight ahead. It makes characters sound more realistic. It makes them sound, facetious. It gives them attitudes or whatever. I don't write straight ahead dialogue in general. So there's an episode where Val is walking down a corridor and he's surrounded by these elemental suits. And he goes, you may be wondering why I brought you all here today. And so I'd have lines like that in the scripts. Yeah. And when we did the first episode, the director was reading these lines and he's like, this is the worst writing I've ever seen. I can't work this way. He storms out because he didn't get the dialogue. And it's kind of like, well, if you're writing in counterpoint to what's going on, if you take it out of context, you don't get the counterpoint. Nothing makes sense anymore. It's one of the other reasons that you want to leave it in the script. But at first he was very much beside himself. And ultimately he came around and we did a really good show. But initially but my way of writing confused him. Okay. Because I like writing people, giving this very indirect sort of, stuff.
Are there any particular sessions or line readings that stood out to you as either challenging or just really enjoyable?
There's a line in the first episode where they're heading back to the ship. Okay. And the line from the actor was, last one, there's a vegan slug rat.
Yeah.
We're like, no. It's last one, there's a vegan slug rat. Get it?
Nice.
Yeah, it's like there's a line in episode 9 that's a Bugs Bunny line, actually. Now that Laughing Boy's out of the picture, and we had to like basically say, okay, this is how you need to say the line for it to play.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah,
I think
which brings me to episode 9. Episode 9. Did you like episode 9?
Which one was 9?
Road to Camelot.
It was fun. It was interesting. Yeah, I mean, it was that was probably one of the deviations from canon in terms of where clans come from. But yeah, I thought it was fun to kind of see the clans go against each other and the inner sphere to be like, what's going on here? So I liked adding that dynamic. But
I wrote it. It's my single favorite episode.
Okay.
I like it because it's very fun and silly. It's like a road picture, like you have, Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, and they go off on an adventure, and the adventure is there to be an adventure, but mostly to be an excuse for the characters to hang jokes on. And so a lot of the dialogue is very jokey and very silly. Although the story does hold together. I mean, it is a story. It isn't just a series of jokes.
Yep.
But it's the episode that I thought was just the most fun. And my favorite thing about it was we got to follow all the secondary characters and leave the big characters behind. And so it's always fun watching those characters that we never see enough of, getting, just real face time for them. And I love everything about that episode. I love all the jokes. I love everything about that episode. And Marty hated that episode. He just fucking despised it.
Oh no.
And Karen hated it more than Marty did. To this day, she just, and it's one of my favorite things I ever wrote because it's so silly and it's fun. Yeah. And I'm tickled that they hate it.
Yeah. Well, I don't hate any of them. If I had a least favorite, I would say it's the one where they're testing the new equipment, like, and they keep hazing Franklin, and I'm just like, oh, come on. But yeah, there's none that stand up. I was talking about line readings. There's a line reading in episode 2 where Adam's character, man, he really lays in to Val. If you do this, you'll be selling your soul. It's just like out of nowhere, I'm like, whoa, all right. It's like Adam does not want him killing that guy. And it's no, there's the funny line readings in there, but yeah, I appreciate the side humor as we go.
I always prefer dialogue to be it's like there are certain lines I wish the actor would be more bemused than angry. Do you know what I mean? It's like what kind of people are we fighting? It's like, what kind of people are we fighting here? It's like so I like when the attitude is a little bit more confused or bemused than direct and angry or whatever. So there were several lines where there was one scene where there were 2 or 3 lines in a row where it's like, okay, if that character was bemused, this would play more fun.
Right.
So, but that kind of thing happens, I mean, you can't be there to control everything, and you can't give everybody every single line reading. You change the things that are important. There was a line in Beast Machines that always bothers me. It's just like, I wish I'd been there for the record, where Optimus says, "You want the Sparks, Megatron? Come and get them." And I'm like, no. The line is, "You want the Sparks, Megatron? Come and get them." Like that's the read.
Yeah.
There was, and just like that, there was a line in Godzilla. We meet this recurring villain named Cameron Winter, and at the end, he's taken away in handcuffs, and he turns and he says, "I'll be back, Nick. You can count on it." That's the line. And the actor's like, "I'll be back, Nick. You can count on it."
Yeah, that doesn't work.
Well, okay, let's take it again. "I'll be back, Nick. You can count on it." It's like, yeah. And finally I go, can we have him say it as friendly as possible? And suddenly the line became really scary. It's like, "I'll be back, Nick. You can count on it." It's like, okay, that's, so, and that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about, sort of writing sideways dialogue, or sort of, indirect, or, I like trying to find ways to make the characters sound more real, and for the line readings to, I don't know, just sound a little bit more off kilter.
Definitely. Well, we talked about Sakamoto as being a favorite character. Kind of, and Zero. Were there any other kind of story arcs that you particularly like drawing out, and maybe as a kind of a tangential to that, were there characters that were primarily your characters and characters that were primarily Marty's characters, or did you guys really bounce back and forth in terms of who was writing who?
We really, I mean, when you get down to it, we really wrote the series together. You can hear slightly different voices between Marty and I when you see his name as the writer and me as the writer. You can see little differences, but anything that we had going was crossing both of our desks. So what he had to offer was in my scripts, what I had to offer were in his scripts, and the overall narrative and everything, that was something that we worked on very, very much together. So I'm not going to say that so any of the characters that you saw were characters that we very much developed together.
Gotcha.
I mean, we each had favorite characters. We each had people that we kind of glommed toward, but it wasn't like he was in charge of this character and I was in charge of this other character.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I know I think I remember reading, the Expanse writers. I forget what each of their names are. They're separate names, but that they each kind of have characters that they write about back and forth, which is why I'd asked. Do you remember what Marty's favorite character was?
It's kind of a Marty question.
Okay.
I think we both liked Zero a lot because his point of view was just it was so understandable, even though it was contrary, to I mean, his attitude toward Adam, his contempt, everything about him was completely consistent. So the reasons he was against all the things that are going on around him are exactly consistent with why he would ultimately side with the clans. So I know I love that. I really liked all the characters. I mean, I had fun getting to play Val, doing all the stuff he was doing in episode 9, where he sees this as a heist. This is going to be his chance to get rich, and
I really enjoyed episode 2 where Val got recruited. That was a fun, probably my number 2. I like number 11, number 2. Episode 2 is my number 2.
You know what? That's very much a Marty story. I look at that episode and it's like, yeah, that's very much Marty. His writing and his structure and everything. I think he did a really mighty fine job on that one. It was really it was a good story. It was solidly told. It's one of my favorite things about the show is that we're introducing the characters not all at once, but little by little. So, we're introduced to one of our major players in the second episode. And he's a wonderfully colorful character, which never hurts. So that was a terrific episode. And yes, I'm putting that, that was Marty's, very much so.
Well, episode 2 was important, and the upscale process that we did for redoing the series last year, because we were initially going to publish them in November of 2020, but the episode, we had a couple copies that were just better than others, and episode 2 is actually the worst episode that we had to work from.
Oh, I don't know. I think
and we
was it episode 3? Episode 3 doesn't even have the writing credits in the beginning.
It's currently 3, and so, but when we originally had the original files, 2 was the roughest copy, and even the upscale, it was still kind of rough. And so because of that, I wasn't willing to kind of embark on the publishing them, because I figured that 1 would look so good, and if 2 immediately looked horrible, then we'd lose a lot of people, and so I went on the search to just try and find a better copy, and it ended up, we found somebody that had 1 through like 7 minus 3, and they were really good copies, and 2 ended up being probably the prettiest copy. And actually we ended up re-uploading number 1 because the new copy of 1 was better, and I think that it just made a huge difference. So it wasn't until 3, and 3 is now our worst, but it wasn't as bad as the original 2 when we upscaled them. So but yeah, so
the first one
we were able to do that one justice.
The third one is very, very blurry. The colors it looks like somebody spilled water on a watercolor.
Yeah.
All the colors blur, and like there are things where you can't see people's eyes, and the credits aren't in the beginning, so it just it's some of the chromo on the planet names and stuff.
Yeah, the VH copies that we had and worked from, a lot of those episodes I had to cut together from different copies, because these are people recording their VHS at home. They're not always caring about getting the end credits or the intro credits. They're just getting whatever the series is, and so
they're just getting to watch it. They're not like archiving it.
Exactly. And so it was there was a lot of cut and pasting in that to try to get it as much as I could from the very intro sequence to the end of the Saban swirly logo at the end. But yeah, I'm still, maybe there'll be more VHS copies that turn up, one of these days that are a little bit better. But
you should write to Disney and ask Disney to release it.
Yeah,
I think Disney bought Saban's library, so Disney probably owns the BattleTech series. Of course, whether they'll want to do something with that, is And I have no idea, how the rights revert or whatever. So it's like, does Saban/Disney own the rights to this thing forever? Did the rights revert to FASA after a while? It's one of those things. So, but I think that it was part of Hwang's library.
Yeah, where I've tracked it, it went from Saban to Disney, and then it has one more step after that. But yeah, I have no idea who would have the records. I just assumed it was long and lost in an archive, and nobody at Disney would be interested because it couldn't make them money. But yeah, we'll see.
You never know. Somebody at Disney could be a big BattleTech fan. You never know.
That's true. Well, I know. Yeah, there's some in there. Well, fingers crossed. Maybe we'll pull up something eventually. But when in the process did you find out it wasn't going to renew for the second season? Had you finished all 13 episodes, or was it somewhere in the lead up to the end that you knew?
It was the beginning of the following year. It was like in January or February of 1995 that we're not getting a pickup. We're not going to do more. That Tycho decided they were going to use their money in advertising as opposed to the series.
Yeah,
which is too bad because when you do that, you wind up with some commercials, but they disappear into the ether, and you don't get a series that people can talk about 30 years later.
Yeah.
I don't remember, you and Kurt, did you talk about episode 5A?
We did. Yeah, we did. And I'm actually I found someone in the community reached out to me that has some editing background and skills. And he's going to try to recut episode 5A from our upscaled versions of the first few episodes, because there is a 5A out there, but it is so bad and so rough that even upscaling it was just not worthy of uploading with the rest. But the audio is there. And I initially was like, well, maybe I can recut it. But I mean, I'm an youth athletic coach by trade. I'm not a video editor. So I got about an hour into it with a grand total of like 3 seconds or 4 seconds worth of video, rebuilt. And I was like, no, I can't. This is not a volunteer effort for my skill level. So, but yes, I have connected with somebody who has editing experience, and he's volunteered to try to take a hack at it, to basically do what I was trying to do and recut the visual clips with the audio so that we can publish 5A. But yeah,
5A was one of my favorite professional war stories.
Okay.
Because I'm home, I'm tooling around, it's Wednesday afternoon. I'm going to say it's Wednesday.
Yeah.
And I got a call from Karin, and Karin's like, we have a problem. I'm like, okay. The contract calls for a new episode to be on every week. Mm-hmm. If they can't have repeats in the first 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. And it was like the 5th week or whatever. We were a few weeks into the show, and they didn't have a show for that weekend. So, okay, we're going to have to repeat, and that's going to be a breach of contract. That's a problem.
Yeah.
So what Karin said was, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take existing footage, and we're going to cobble together a new episode. Mm-hmm. And this is like almost verbatim. I'm like, okay, I'm not being cute or coy. I'm not trying to be, sarcastic. I'm going to repeat back to you what I heard you say to make sure that I understood what you were saying. Mm-hmm. You want us to take existing footage and create a new episode for Sunday. And she's like, well, that's what we're doing. So Marty and I and Kurt Weldon and Karin sat in a little edit bay, and we watched a bunch of episodes and saw what we had. And we figured, okay, well, if we make it a conversation between our hero and the people he's working for, and the villain and the people he's working for, and they're each talking about their experiences, then it can bring new viewers up to speed. And at the same time, it'll create the illusion of a new episode. And what was really nice was that some of the scenes in there were from episodes that hadn't aired yet. So it was new story, not just, so instead of playing just like a clip show, it played like a new independent, we meant for this to happen episode. And I think if you watch it, it stands up on its own as an episode. I think it holds up.
I agree. It's a good episode.
But so
That's,
I was writing notes while we were like looking at all this stuff, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take the point on this. I'm gonna write the first draft. And Marty, I'm gonna call you at 3:30 or 4 and send it to you. And so, it's 4 in the morning. I'm calling Marty. He's like, okay, I'm gonna turn on my computer. I'm gonna download it. And back then you had to use dial-up modems, so it wasn't just, I'm just gonna email it to you. It was a thing. It's like, okay, are you logged on? Okay, I'm logged on. Are you okay? Are you ready to receive? It's the whole fucking thing. And and so, we wrote the thing basically overnight. And then Kurt was there. I was hanging out with Kurt while he was like, they brought the actors in to do the dialogue. And then they were taking the lip flap and altering it so it would sync up to the new dialogue. And it really plays, when Adam is talking to, the Steiners and the people back home, and when Malthus is talking to Cheese too, it looks like you're watching something that is supposed to function this way. But we Frankenstein the shit out of that thing. We did that. It was like meatball surgery. It was like, where a mash unit in the body comes in, and it's like, we got to bring this thing back to life. We need it back on the front. So, and so it was a giant group effort. It was fun and grueling and horrible. And we made it work. We made our air date. That's the first law. Make your air date. We made it. So we were very, very proud that we helped them not default on the show.
Yeah, the Kurt heard that story on his talk, and his wife, or I guess what would have been his future wife, is responsible for it. Were they together at the time? Okay. Yeah. Was responsible for that.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. She chirped in. Why don't you do a clip show? It's like, yeah, honey, you just ruined my weekend.
Yeah. Yeah. But good. But it is a good show, and those listening, we'll try and get out to you eventually, on the channel. But yeah, it's a fun one. Very cool. Well, this has been a ton of fun, Bob. I appreciate you kind of taking a trip down memory lane with us and giving us a little insight into kind of how the cartoon came to be. But there's still some of us enjoying it, and more so, we can share it with our kids now and get them into a little bit of BattleTech in this great universe. So
that means a lot to me. I have always considered BattleTech to be sort of a lost series. It didn't have the afterlife that a lot of shows have enjoyed. It doesn't share, it isn't revered the way Batman the Animated Series or the Fox X-Men series it was. And I think that it has incredible merits. I think it's a really, we told a really good story. We told what I consider a really sophisticated story, considering it was an animated series for 2 to 11-year-olds. We delivered a novel, and I'm really proud of the work that we did. I think that the team that made that series, we put together something really special. So, thanks for inviting me on to talk about it. And thanks for giving me a chance to relive it. I just watched the entire series over the last 3 days, and it felt invigorating to go back in time and see all these characters that I've been missing.
Yeah, my favorite feedback I get from the community is when people come and they say that their kids will watch BattleTech with them now because it's the video quality is up there. So so they're out there, they're enjoying it. We're getting another generation in, and even the older generation, even there's some that might think the animation is dated, but you can tell the work that you guys put into writing it and respecting the source material, and it's appreciated. So, thank you.
We very much respected the source material, and we very much respected the audience. And we hope that shows.
We appreciate it. We respect the effort. Well, thanks again, Bob. This is Travis signing off. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.